Day zero is the moment before company formation, when a founder decides to take the plunge, follow their dream, and commit to pursuing their vision of change. On day zero, you'll hear founders tell their story. From the initial idea, through reactions by critics and skeptics, setbacks and successes, we'll cover it all. Behind every company is a founder with ambition, goals, dreams, and wisdom to be shared. Let's explore them together.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tarun Kapoor, Chief Digital Transformation Officer here at Virtua Health, doing a chat today, a podcast with Aditya Bansod from Luma Health. We're doing this through the Think Medium platform of Day Zero. So thank you very much, Aditya, for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure, TK. It's really exciting to be here with you.
So Aditya, first thing, we're going to talk about Luma Health and how you helped co-found that company. Just full disclosure, we at Virtua Health are working with the folks over at Luma. That's how we got introduced. But first and foremost, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. So my background, kind of myself, is I'm that very boring Silicon Valley product manager type. I started my career working at, Microsoft. You really can't get much bigger than that. And eventually I was on a glide path over the last 15, 20 years to get to a company that was about, zero, starting my own shop. And through there, I worked at, Microsoft, Adobe, these big Fortune 3 maybe to Fortune 500 to, venture-backed startups. So about halfway through my career, I made a switch into working in venture-backed companies and, took my first opportunity at a Series B company. Then after that, I took my next shot at a Series B company. Really that glide path I was saying was my path to founding what became Luma Health. And, but my entire process, my entire career through that was about building software. I have a passion for making great software. And through my life, I've kind of always wanted to make software that impacts people's lives. And one of the things that I really wanted to do around my entire career, and kind of when I left the Fortune 500, kind of went to the venture-backed world, was really build software that helps kind of everyday people where it's an all boats rise situation. And I think that's been a real guiding principle for me is when I build software is around how do I make software where everybody wins. And so that's kind of my path. But, the easiest quip there is super boring Silicon Valley product manager dude type.
Microsoft, not your typical mom and pop shop, to building,
not so much.
Yeah, building Luma and co-founding it. Now, so tell us a little bit more. You were one of three co-founders?
There's three total co-founders. There's myself, and so I'm the CTO at Luma. There's Adnan Iqbal, he is our CEO, and Tashfeen Ekram, and he's a radiologist, a practicing radiologist, and he's about 2 to 3 days being a radiologist and about 2 to 3 days being our chief medical officer. The way we kind of split it up, it's sort of for a health tech company. I kind of think of that as an ideal founding team because you have the clinical, kind of the voice of the doctor, the voice of the actual care delivery in Tashfeen. And then Adnan, his background is more, he came up through Genentech and, and more pharma and research. And so he's kind of more focused on kind of the sales and marketing aspects, kind of the pre-sale universe. And myself in kind of that product delivery mindset, I focus primarily on product engineering, implementations, customer success, and that sort of thing. So kind of Adnan and I and the day-to-day operators as we run the company, he's really focused on everything about getting customers to Luma, and I'm all about delivering them value from what they purchase.
So how did the three of you meet?
So it's funny, Adnan and I have known each other kind of in each other's social universes since undergrad. So he went to Cal, I went to San Diego, and Tashfeen went to Cal as well. And Tashfeen and Adnan were college roommates. I was kind of in the social circle. I had a lot of friends at UC San Diego who were had gone to high school in Northern California with Adnan and some of his folks. So we'd kind of always been in each other's universe for quite some time, never particularly close. And then when we had, I was talking to one of my friends, one of those shared friends actually. It's like, hey, you know what? I'm kind of interested in looking at my next thing. Kind of really interested in health tech, and I really was focused on three kind of key opportunities: health, education, and financial services, and kind of really where products I could build that could explain to my mother was sort of the moniker for the next role I wanted to take. And my buddy Miguel, he was like, hey, you should talk to Adnan. He's trying to get this thing off the ground, which is in healthcare. So my background is not healthcare. I think now after doing it for 8 years, I can say I'm a healthcare person, but my kind of background was communication technologies. I worked at Hotmail. I worked in the Flash and Air teams at Adobe. I worked at Remind, which is K-12 communication software. So my background is communication. So you can kind of see with what Luma does, which is patient success, really about connecting patients and providers and operations teams. that became a big kind of piece where I think Adnan and I found a really good mind meld, where he was like, had this pieces of this idea, him and Tashfeen had pieces of this idea, had a really strong background in communication. And, we kind of known each other for a while. So we're like, all right, let's take this jump together.
So you weren't thinking healthcare, Anand was thinking healthcare. So then why 2007-ish, right? This is when Luma kicked off thereabouts?
2015.
Oh,
and
my goodness, yes.
Yeah, a little bit after that. But I wasn't particularly, I wasn't specifically, I should say, thinking about healthcare. It was among the areas where, I thought I could build products, that and education and to some degree financial services where like I could explain them to my mother, right? So just to give you kind of the black versus white, my role prior was at a company called Sencha, and we built embedded HTML5 frameworks for developers to use to build mobile and desktop and blah, blah, blah applications. So when I explained it to somebody, a layperson, my mother being the best litmus test there is, they're like, cool. So does that mean my phone works faster? Like, no, well, it actually reduces operational costs for developers to bring products to market faster. And so it's kind of like, okay, I've done a big arc in my career around like doing that sort of stuff. Like I want to do something where I can explain it to, my mother. So actually TK, the original idea for Luma was a lot simpler than kind of what we became, which was a waitlist product. So, and it came from Tashfeen's clinical background, which was as a radiologist, he'd show up to the office he'd leave the office, on a Friday, pack schedule Monday, pack schedule Tuesday, pack schedule Wednesday. But by Monday, 4:00, Tuesday was looking like Swiss cheese. Wednesday was looking like Swiss cheese. And you knew there were patients who wanted to get access to him when he was a radiologist at Michigan. It could take weeks to get that imaging appointment done. So really, an original product idea was about liquidity, about matching supply and demand. And it's so simple, right? Like I try to get care before you as a provider. I'm sure, when you try to want to give care, patients can very rarely get access to providers at the kind of timing or the convenience that they want. So our initial product was so small, so simple, and it turned out to be really just like an iceberg, which was just what was above the waterline. What became underneath was really about what we talk about as patient success now.
So along those lines, I mean, I think you tap in a recurring theme, and that is what you thought you were solving for didn't end up being what you solved for. And it's only once you multiply peel back layer after layer after layer. How long did that take for you to realize and figure out, weight loss and now where Luma is today?
Yeah, Waitlist, not weight loss, kind of a different product.
Waitlist, yes.
I could use a little weight loss myself, but
yes, exactly.
Not the problem we aim to go solve. For us, it's been very simple. Like the idea around the Waitlist was around patients getting access to care. And it turns out that problem definition is so simple that the solution set under it is incredibly broad. So we rolled out our first product as this waitlist opportunity, and we rolled it out to a friend and family cardiologist who's in San Jose, and then to another friend and family interventionalist, I think, in somewhere in the Northern California area. And what we really realized was like, how are we going to figure out and identify patients who are not going to show up? And so we kind of then built a reminders product. And then we're like, hey, should we actually ask the patients, was this a positive experience after they came in for care? So we built our feedback product. So a lot of that discovery, the peeling back of the onion was like, okay, and then what's the next problem? What's the next adjacent problem? What is the next piece of value that you can deliver to your customers now that you have a customer kind of trusting you for one piece of the problem set that they're looking to solve? So I think an onion's a really great example. But also the kernel is also another really good analogy for it, which is the beginning problem was so small, which is around a wait list. But really, as we kind of went and kind of unpacked next level, there's so many additional adjacent problems. And for us, what was really important was solving adjacent problems, not orthogonal problems, right? Like it's very tempting when you're early stage, like, well, really great example. We're like, should we do pharmacy benefit cards? So we had this like conversation, like, because like, hey, we're messaging patients. Can we send them PBM cards, let them know they can get a discount and blah, blah, blah. It's like, wait, we know nothing about this. We know a lot about supply and demand. We know a lot about actually connecting and communicating with patients. Let's go solve the next problem that looks like that. And I think that's really where that peel back of the onion becomes. You're like peeling back an onion and suddenly you realize, hey, it's, don't go grab the orange.
I think that's such a great analogy and a key takeaway for the listeners here of having that balance of curiosity of what's next to you, but not the hubris to say, I can do anything. And right. And
yeah.
Right. No one ever went out of business because they focused too much. And is one of the things we heard through. So you settle now, okay, and you realize this is where we're taking Luma. And Luma was falling into this category of patient communications platforms, whatever the class KLAS review section you would look you up under. And recently you rebranded yourself as Patient Success Platform. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. And the moniker under which we operated for a long time was called Total Patient Engagement. And patient engagement was the framing in the industry, which is like, how do you engage patients? And I think the more we dug into, how we talk to customers, partners, prospects, industry experts, and that sort of stuff, what kind of became this bubbling zeitgeist inside the company is patients don't really want to be engaged. Like, engagement is what the health system wants. What patients want to do is be successful. And that was this concept that we started really banding about called the Great Disconnect, which is what patients want to be successful. What provider groups and health systems want to do is engage patients. Like, whose voice should we be listening to as we try to build products? It's really the patient's voice. And so we started to build up this concept called patient success, which was, what are the, tools, techniques, best practices, all the stuff you need to do to help a patient from the moment they know they want to get care to the moment that they've received and been successful in the care outcome they're looking for. And I think that's become a really big reframe in how we even think about, branding the company, talking about our market opportunities, but also in terms of the brand promise. And it's an interesting thing is the part of this exercise, one of the things our product team did is they've really taken this fact, which is this making the patient successful? And they've articulated as a brand promise into their own kind of product planning activities. So they say like, hey, I want to build this new feature. It's like, well, is that actually going to make the patient successful? Does it actually satisfy the brand promise? And I think that's an evolution in our own kind of the way that we think, which is patient engagement was good. Success is better. And then now can we flow that into how we talk about the company, how we talk to prospects, what products we build? And I think it's been a very broad evolution of how the company even thinks about itself. And that's really what it came from was this revelation or this kind of thought that bubbled up inside the company, which is patient engagement is what health systems want, but patients really want to be successful. Like, the rest is kind of immaterial.
I think that's such a profound revelation that even health systems need to be thinking about it from themselves. And, I think a lot of times, in being in a health system, we're thinking things around how do we get our clinicians more engaged? How do we get our staff more engaged? And maybe we're asking the wrong question. How do we make our clinicians more successful? Right. So you got me thinking about it, and I got a long drive this evening here. So, but you gave me something to think about for a little
bit.
Good.
I think it's honestly like engagement, engagement's like really interesting and it's powerful, right? Because we can measure it, we can metric it, we can, run surveys about it. Success is hard, right? Like, if a patient comes in for, a knee replacement or whatever it is, like, success is like actually like a very long road versus like engagement's kind of easy. So like, I think we have to all pick the harder thing to do because we want to do that thing, which I think was that kind of career hypothesis I had, which is I want all boats to rise, right? I want to build a product where all boats rise. And I think success kind of outlines the ability to do that.
What allowed for that conversation to happen in the company? Is there something in terms of a setup? Is there something in terms of the culture of the company that allowed this type of insight?
Well, I think we have a couple key things we talk about in the Luma culture. One of them is the willingness to get dirt under your fingernails, where in the other side of that coin is there's no job is too small, right? Like, doesn't matter if you're a manager or if you're a developer, like, you should be able to, like, a developer should be able to look and see the sales metrics. The salesperson should be able to, go look and see how the product's configured and maybe want to even do that, like that real sense of getting the dirt under their fingernails. And so I think that really led to this ability where, like, we try our best not to silo, like, only your key customer people, you only talk to customers. If a developer wants to sit in on a customer conversation, they're more than welcome to. If a salesperson wants to sit in a product planning meeting, they're more than welcome to. And I think it's that kind of like getting those internal flywheels of dialogue where it's like, our sales folks, our marketing folks, they'd be like, I'm hearing, we're fighting this thing around patient engagement. We're just like talking about metrics. And, our customer success folks are like, well, we heard about, these patients not being successful. Like, they're getting bombarded with, say, messages, or they're being overly engaged. And a lot of our conversations they have with their health system partners is, hey, like, are we over engaging our patients? Are we trying to push them too hard? And so I think it kind of really bubbled up from that sense that, like, people inside the company, we put a high premium on having people outside their standard 9 to 5 spend time with each other. So I think that's kind of one of those kind of motions that we have inside the organization that helps us kind of make sure that what you're hearing in one part of the team is actually influencing what someone else is going to be able to do as well. So maybe a bit apocryphal, but I think that actually helped quite a bit in actually helping us understand what what was actually needed in order to frame what we wanted to go.
And I think that's such a great pivot point, because one of the, we've been talking a lot about the internal dynamics that is driving Luma. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the external dynamics.
Yeah, definitely.
And a shift, right? So the last 7 years, pretty interesting, pretty frothy market for startups, and we're in a little bit of a different place now. Tell us a little bit more about how you're thinking about the financial instabilities, the inflation in the market, and lessons you've learned before, or even previous companies, of potentially building a company during a tough financial.
Building a company now, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, actually, I'll rewind the tape to 2015 before I go to 22, which is when we founded the company. It was not sexy to invest in health tech. It was not like a thing where you wanted to, there was no exits. There was no Teladoc, there's no Livongo, there's no transactional activity in the market. It was the only real highlight was Practice Fusion, which I think took down $400 million and basically went down bankrupt along the way. And so 2015 was an awful time to start a health tech company. So when we raised, for any other entrepreneurs out there, when we raised our seed round, it was all cats and dogs. Our biggest check was $100,000. We had piles of $25,000 and $50,000 checks, which compared in contrast to 2022, 2021, you're seeing seed rounds that are $7 million with a $4 million lead. And we're that wasn't our world whatsoever. And I think for a lot of companies raising now, longevity is a function of actually wanting to get it done. And I think we really wanted to make this happen. And so right now, it feels a little bit for the early seed stage organizations, seed stage companies, 2-3 people trying to get something done, 3, 4, 5 people. 2015 was a probably good comp, right? Because now we're seeing Livongo and Teladoc, Teladoc specifically, market cap's gone off the cliff. There's going to be there were supposed to be IPOs that never happened, from a lot of health tech organizations. And so, it doesn't feel so different than what 2015 did, but I think a lot of the VCs kind of who have weathered downturns and stuff like that, saying out of the crucible comes the strongest companies. And, some of the, Google was founded in a downturn, right? And so, I would like to believe that valley that we were sitting in 2013, 14, 15, specifically for health tech, other entity. If I was creating a company which is Bitcoin for cats in 2015, 2016, I would have raised $150 million on in year one. But, health tech wasn't that. So I think this is, an opportunity for capital to go after good ideas. And I think the tough part, and I help a couple companies who are early stage. One of the things Luma did early on was we joined the Stanford StartX Accelerator. And so out of that, we kind of coach a couple of younger organizations that are coming up now. And I think the lesson to a lot of them is build a great product, solves a real problem. And with that, there's money to be had. There's money to be invested. And I think seed money is available for those folks who are starting really, really early. But, the days of easy money and that $7 million seed round, it may be a little tough to get for a couple of years. But great companies are built out of the crucible.
Yeah, well, Airbnb was founded right during the Great Recession, and other ones coming through. So founding is not the issue. In terms of how you're trying to focus on results, has that, or different types of results in this, I don't want to call it full downturn, but in this pause at least, has that changed at all?
Well, I think the biggest thing that's changed is who are the most important people in the buyer's persona, in the buying panel. So in the boom times, the innovation teams, the digital transformation teams in health tech, they have a lot of sway, right? In kind of the downturn, what we started to see is CFOs will have a lot of say in the buying purchase now. And it's not necessarily a negative in terms of the buying. It just, you have to present a more ROI focused, a much more vision oriented, how do I help that, TK, you sit in the world of innovation, how do I help the innovation officer actually achieve their goals, and then spell it out from an ROI perspective, comps, metrics. The bar is a little bit higher. The CFO has a larger voice. But especially in health tech right now, I think the evolution towards a digital transformation is giving people in the transformation seat a much larger voice. But now they might have gotten a partner that they may not have had before in the CFO. That's the only big change. But the need and demand, that hasn't changed whatsoever. Just a little bit more discerning, people who are not willing to go through people who are looking for the easy sale from kind of an economic perspective. That might be tough. You need to kind of come in a little bit more disciplined, ready to talk to a CFO persona.
All right. Really, really interesting. So Yeah, so you said 7 years ago it wasn't so sexy to talk about health tech. Now, yeah, it's really exciting to talk about health tech. But guess what? It's not. It's not only sexy to talk about health tech from a startup, from a new entrant perspective, but the incumbents are really thinking about this, right? So, I think the big ride or the big gripe against the big EMR players in the space was you're a system of record, you're not a system of engagement, or even if they were
system of action
system, right? And not something that. Well, they're starting to really think about this space, aren't they now? And so how is that driving chain talk conversations at Luma? How is that causing you to think through now as the incumbents are saying, these guys are onto something?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think if you sit in any ecosystem, you expect kind of the incumbent to be asleep at the wheel forever. You're expecting your lunch to get eaten. I think the technology industry at large, and I've been in this market in the tech writ large for 20 odd years. You look when Microsoft released like Windows 95 or 3.1, it included a defragger. And if you're old enough to know what that means, it like you used to buy separate software to defragment your hard drive. And then suddenly one day Microsoft ships it, $50 to $60 million companies are out of business in a year. And I think those lessons are many, many times in the tech industry. The platform will always want to consume as much of the capabilities of the vendors on top of it. That's the natural evolution. So if you're going to be somebody like ourselves, and for the folks who don't know out there, like Luma, our lifeblood is actually kind of one of our senses of pride is how good we are at integrating with EHRs, electronic health records and electronic medical records. And if we sat and looked at the products we had in 2015 as the things that are going to get us to the next stage of our company's evolution, we should go the way of the dodo. That's completely acceptable. That would be what I expect. So it's incumbent on us to build those next products, to build the next set of capabilities, whether, we're investing in things like our payments capabilities, our chatbot capabilities, things around IVR and call deflection to make sure that call centers, there's so many problems to go solve in healthcare and to make health systems operate more efficiently but keeping the EMR as that system of record, but maybe taking the action that we need to do to other parts and solve other problems. So we've got a great franchise here that helps fund the next set of things that we're going to go do. Because if we're asleep at the wheel, we should have our lunch taken from us. That's the only fair thing to happen in the market.
Would it be fair to say that for the entrepreneur in the healthcare ecosystem, you have to be a serial entrepreneur within your own company?
I think it's a really good way of saying it, honestly, TK. It's like there is it's funny, like the company's grown quite a bit, right? It used to be 3 of us, and then it was like 4 of us, and those 4 people lasted for almost a year, and so on and so on. And you have this sense, and a lot of folks will say this, there's a concept in Silicon Valley startups, it's like founder crazy, right? So they always want to build the next thing. They always want to go figure something out. And I think if anything, it comes from a sense of paranoia, right? Which is if we rest on our laurels on the existing franchise, someone else is going to take our lunch money. And I think, you say it a little bit more eloquently than me, which is you should always be innovating. I'm just saying, I'm paranoid that someone else is going to take my lunch money from me. And if we don't innovate, it's going to happen. And the technology industry has chapter and verse written about it time and time again.
Yeah, I think, and someone said it probably more eloquently than both of us, right? Only the paranoid survive. I think it was Andy Grove, right?
Andy Grove.
Right, from Intel. And it's probably so true. So just as we kind of wrap up here, if you could share a couple of those, I'm sure it has not been always a smooth, straight, linear path for you. Making that assumption just because it's never that way for any entrepreneur.
It never is.
What are a couple lessons you can share with budding entrepreneurs out there on how you overcame some of the darkest days or the darkest challenges, as much as you can share?
Yeah. I mean, there's a handful that come to mind, so one of the first ones is financing, right? Every entrepreneur has a dark spot, almost every entrepreneur has a dark memory, a dark place they went to when, that investor they thought they were going to land for the big check that they were going to let them unlock, the next thing didn't happen. And, we've had, I can tell you the amount of times that, Adnan and I walked into a VC's boardroom, we walk back out and it's we killed it. It's going to be amazing. They're going to give us a term sheet tomorrow. And then you don't hear from them from a week, and a week later, they're you get the text message that's hey, sorry, the partners wanted to go another direction. the amount of times that you just get the air taken out of you, like the balloon deflates on things like that. Like, I can't tell you, like that happened probably a dozen times, right? And so that is like this, there's no good answer here, right? It's just a war story that entrepreneurs go through where it's like eventually you find a great partner, and we've got great investors now who see eye to eye with kind of what you want to do with the business. And it takes a lot of no's. It takes a lot of no's to get to a yes. And there's some organizations, some kind of startups where that's not true. I think in health tech, that's more true than not. And, we went through dozens of no's before we got to our A round. We went through dozens of no's before we got to our B round and our C round and all that sort of stuff. And it was, each one's a gut punch, right? Because you walk out of every one of those meetings and you think like, that's the one, like this is going to be what's going to catapult us to the next level. And you just don't hear from them. You get a text message, you get an email, maybe the associate gets back to you, say, hey, like the partner is like not interested in the next meeting. You're like, oh, talk about taking the air out of the balloon. So I think that's definitely a dark area. I think one of the other areas where I think for a lot of like founders, early entrepreneurs, is how to react to losing a deal that you really cared about. And so, we're in the business of making software, and the business of making software is to sell it. And you're not going to win every deal. By a lot of SaaS metrics, you'll probably lose 60 to 70% of the deals that you actually get in front of. And losing only 60 to 70% is actually pretty good. And I think, but you believe so strongly in what you built, why you built it, why it makes perfect sense for the customer. I think that's like this like place where it requires a lot of introspection to say like, was that the right customer? Should I have qualified him better? Do I have the right product? Do I have the right pricing? Do I have the right packaging? Do I have the right partnerships? Like doing a 3 or 4 P's exercise around each one of the deals you lost. That's actually some discipline we didn't have in the beginning. And we built a lot of product we didn't need because we thought, if we only had that one feature, they would have bought it. 9 out of 10 times, it's actually not it, right? In early stage, you're building more than you're selling. And so taking time and discipline out of what you lost to figure out what you should build, I think is a lesson that we could have taken better ourselves.
Yeah, and the story you just mentioned reminds me of a story I've heard even from on the military front, special ops, etc. After a mission, you could have been up for 36 hours. They debrief on the mission before they're done. Right, the mission is never complete before the debrief. What went well, what didn't go well, and just the discipline, because it's probably on some days when it didn't go well, like meet you at the bar. No, we're sitting here and we're
doing the hard work.
We're doing the hard work when you are probably the least in an emotional state of wanting to do the hard work. I think a really important lesson that you emphasize here. Just some closing questions and thoughts here. From you. We talked about what fuels you, what fuels the company from an innovation and advancement. What also fuels you outside of that? I mean, does the entrepreneur literally have to give up everything to keep the lights on and keep it moving forward? Or have you been able to find some degree of something you've been able to carve out from yourself from the rest of the world?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really great question because it's very much a life stage question. When I founded Luma Health, I hadn't met my now wife. I met my wife, got married, had kid, all within like the time that we've had Luma Health. Like Luma Health, a lot of people joke is my first wife. My actual wife is my second wife. But like you have to make time for real life to happen, right? And I think a lot of folks, especially like, where I am in my life stage, my age, my grays, you can kind of maybe guess a little bit on my age there. That sort of stuff becomes much more important. And when I was in my 20s, I was working at Hotmail, like working till 2 a.m, like sitting, like, eating flat foods that could get slipped under a door, like pizza was totally acceptable. And it was great. It was fun. And I called those years sort of like my grad school. Like I felt like those were years where you do want to invest that amount of time. But I think because, I was able to invest that time then, it gave me the opportunity to be able to create some space now. And I think you ask anyone at Luma, they're like, what are you talking about? This guy works 24/7. I'm like, I don't feel that because I love what I do. I love building software. I love building Luma, but I do feel for myself, I have time for my family, I have time for my friends. I have time to go out to dinner, whatever it might be, or, go to the gym, whatever it is. So I feel like, it's a labor of love. And that gives me like the time that I invested earlier in my career gives me the time to like understand, like, where should I focus? What's most important to me? Is it this pull request in GitHub? Is it this Zendesk customer ticket? Is it this marketing plan I need to review? Like understanding like what's most important right now. And then there's stuff I can defer to tomorrow. There just always is. And so being able to take that stuff, kick it to the next day so I can spend time with my daughter and wife.
So I've peppered you with a bunch of questions, Aditya. Was there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share with the audience before we?
That was Around the World in Luma Health, and it's a Jules Verne novel. Is in where 30 odd minutes it's been. No, I mean, I think honestly, for the young entrepreneurs out there, I think you're entering an area, a time where it will be difficult to do some fundraising, but many companies have come before you who've done this before. It's like good products solve real problem, and then the sky's the limit. Honestly, it's just like that's where big problems and big opportunities come from. And the funding, it happens, right? You'll get a lot of no's before you get some yeses, but you will get some yeses. And I think that was a lesson that we learned dozens of times over the course of 2015 to 2022. So for me, doing this is super fun. I love building software. It's kind of in my DNA. Like I've written code myself since I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. And so being able to do this, I think if you can marry up the opportunity, solve a big problem, drive real value, and you do something that you love along the way, I think you could do this for 100 years.
Aditya Bansod, the self-proclaimed boring Silicon Valley tech guy. I think we have hopefully dispelled any notion of the boring part, and absolutely just enjoyable conversation with you. Very enlightening. Thrilled to be able to talk to you about your journey, talk about Luma, and the opportunity to continue to work with you in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, TK, real pleasure. Thanks for having me.